Yeah, thanks, Marcus. So, as Marcus said, Eric Morse. I've been with Tandem for over 5+ years. Been in the PEO industry for over 11 years. Doing HR work for over 11 years, as said, and then I'm going into my third year of leadership with Tandem. Earned my PHR 6 years ago, and then just recently attended the SHRM National Conference in Las Vegas. Real cool event. And then just two things about me: employment law and employment law and employee relations. My two biggest areas of fun within the scope of the HR arena. So super excited about the conversation today. And yeah, Mona, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about you.
Yeah, of course. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mona Singh. I have 9 years of experience in HR. I'm one of the HR business partners here. My experience varies from marketing, financial services, healthcare, and social media tech. Super excited to be a part of this Ask the HR Expert session, and looking forward to it. Back to you, Marcus.
Awesome. Thank you both. Today, we're going to cover some general content about Form I-9, its requirements, and how to be compliant. We'll also answer questions that you submitted upon registering, and we'll also sprinkle in some common questions that we get from clients about Form I-9. We have muted everyone's lines here just to make the experience a little more enjoyable for everyone so we don't hear the background noise. But we do encourage you to participate and submit any questions that you have. You can do that two ways. You can do that in the chat feature, just drop a question in there. And I think there's even a Q&A chat feature, so you can put it in there too. We'll check both of them. But we want to make this as interactive and as formative as possible. We'll do our best to answer the questions that you raise as we go along. And if we're unable to answer your question, or if your question is a little specific and it may be more of an involved discussion, we can reach out to you after the presentation. So we have your contact information, but if you're asking something that's very specific, please just drop your email in there as well so we can get back to you. This webinar is also being recorded for all of our registrants, so you don't need to worry about taking notes if you don't want to. We also had a couple of questions of people who registered and said they couldn't attend, but they wanted the recording. No problem at all. You'll get a copy of the recording after we conclude here. So now that I've listed all the housekeeping rules, let's get started answering some questions. The first question we received is, who are the HR experts? And while that may have been tongue-in-cheek, I do want to address it. And we're the experts for purposes of this webinar. I don't say that in a boastful way. I mean, trust me, we don't know everything. But we have done quite a bit of research on I-9s. We have advised clients about I-9s and advised clients on how to comply with Form I-9. Now, there are a lot of degrees of expertise on this topic. You can go very, very deep. There are a lot of nuances and unique situations that pop up. And so expert is kind of a relative term. Recently, we've been working with a long-term client on I-9 compliance, and we've engaged a third-party consultant who is a former ICE official, actually, to do an audit. Now, are we qualified experts, HR experts, to do an I-9 audit? Heck no. Heck no. There's so much nuance when you're talking about doing an audit or something like that. But we do have insights to share that can help you be compliant and keep you from getting into the weeds or getting into the crosshairs of Homeland Security or ICE. And that's why we're doing the webinar now. Because we want to share what we've learned through that experience of working with that consultant, and also talk about some upcoming changes to Form I-9 and how you need to be aware of that and how you might go about implementing that. So having said all of that, Mona, do you want to kick us off and just kind of giving us some baseline information about what is Form I-9?
Yeah, of course. So what is it? Why do we use the Form I-9? So it's used to verify identity, employment authorization status for new hires. Just some background, there was an Immigration Reform Control Act of 1986 that made it illegal to knowingly hire an individual without verifying their identity and their employment status. So this is required for all employees, regardless of the size, and everyone must comply. So who completes it? Section 1, you need to complete it by the employee. So Section 2 and Section 3 need to be completed by the employer or designated personnel, which we'll kind of get into a little bit later. When does it need to be completed? So Section 1 needs to be completed prior to the employee's start date or on the employee's start date. Section 2 must be completed within 3 business days of the employee's start date. Keep in mind of the employee schedule, just in case they're not, working consecutive days. I know that the 3 business days kind of does get confusing, so I'll kind of share an example. If an employee starts on Monday, Section 1, that's when that needs to be completed or prior to then. Section 2 needs to be completed by end of day Thursday. So you do have some time in between that, but just to kind of give you an example. Why are we talking about this now? So the temporary flexibilities that we had in place for COVID are now ending. But don't worry, we have some great material coming up to kind of help you through this process.
So yeah, thanks, Mona. That's a great lead into our next topic and our next question. So appreciate you sharing kind of what and high level what an I-9 is there. So one of the next questions that we wanted to kind of talk through is, we got an employer who is fully remote and they use an I-9 verification vendor. There are a few out there, and they want to know how these I-9 vendors that verify employment, and we're not talking e-verify, so that's a separate entity, if you will. So we're just talking I-9 verification vendors, how anyone could be an authorized representative for signing Section 2, and how can that be compliant? So I'm going to answer that directly, but I'm going to let Mona kind of speak to kind of the pre and post-COVID world of the I-9 form, which we'll get to here in a second here.
Awesome. Do you want to, there we go. Thank you. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, the U.S. Citizenship Immigration Services implemented temporary provisions to facilitate the completion of the I-9 form while kind of considering social distancing, remote work arrangements, depending on what that would be. So the following procedures were put in place. So it would be remote verification, virtual inspections, and then physical presence was waived. So in short, we were allowed to inspect documents via Zoom or, fax it or even email in the comfort of our own homes, or I guess wherever you were working that day. As we kind of stated before, that the temporary flexibilities we had in place for COVID were ending. They're actually ending in about 30 days. So the end date is July 31st of this year. All documents that were inspected remotely will need to now be seen and verified in person by August 30th.
Can I kind of reset us here a little bit? Yeah. So Section 1 of the I-9, completed by the employee before hire or first day of hire, right?
Yep.
Section 2 of the I-9 is completed by the employer within 3 business days, right, of hire. To complete Section 2, employer needs to look at the employee's identification to make sure the employee is who they say they are and they're able to work in the US.
Yep.
So during COVID, you could look at those documents through Zoom, like, I don't know my license, but you could like show, hey, here's my license, and that would be acceptable. What we're saying now is post-COVID, or I guess at the end of July, you have to go back. The government has said you have to go back to the way things were before COVID, which means you have to have eyes on the documents in person, right?
Yep.
Correct. Yep. You have to feel it. You have to see the paper, try to look at the height, for example. If the person that's in front of you is 6 foot tall and you see on the card that it's 5'3", that's a red flag.
And probably too, looking at the authenticity of the document.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Just
And,
wanted to
yeah, Marcus, and a little known provision within the Form I-9 that Department of Homeland Security, ICE, USCIS, you name it, they don't care who is designated as an authorized representative. So Anybody can complete an I-9 form in the eyes of the government. Now, why is that compliant? It's because the employer will be held liable at the end of the day for said authorized representative, completing section 2 and,
Okay.
under perjury of, if you could maybe speak to that a little bit more from an attorney's background of what that means of an authorized
Yeah.
representative signing that document,
Yeah.
but they're verifying that they physically seen that document. And it's at the end of the day, the employer's liability if there's any errors or omissions. So
Yeah.
the government, like, as I just said, does not care. It could be your neighbor, it could be your aunt, your uncle, cousin, nephew, signing
The
off.
person who's signing section 2 of the I-9, who's verifying these documents.
Yeah,
They do not need to be a W-2 employee of the employer.
they do
They
not.
could be anyone.
Correct.
Now, what you said that's important, and what we'll get into this in a minute, is they are going to signing the I-9, they're signing it under penalty of perjury. So that means it's the same as if they were in court with their hand on a, hand up swearing to the truth that these documents appear to be authentic and that these documents match this person that's in front of me. But the person who does that doesn't need to be an employee of the employer.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. So
Okay.
if ICE or, ICE comes walking in the doors, and you have, trusted, your colleagues who are in a different state and they are doing paper I-9s and they're having their neighbors and again, aunts and uncles doing it and they've have no training, or you're kind of just putting that trust in and no one's having any oversight on that. The employer will be responsible for any, errors and omissions in said audit. So it's important to make sure that you're having some oversight on that as an employer.
So this whole discussion have to be eyes on, and someone has to verify. This is going to present a problem for employers who have a remote workforce, right? They may have employees all over the country. And just as an aside, we've seen that for a lot of our client companies during COVID, that they've, employees now are everywhere. They're working remotely. Tandem has remote employees. And so this is very, very common. So with this COVID guidance going away, how are companies going to comply with this, or how would you recommend companies comply with this?
That's a great question, and we actually got that as a question. So
yeah,
go ahead. And Mona, do you want to take that one for us?
Yeah, of course. So some of the re-verification options that we do have, and do you mind going to the next slide, please? Thank you. So they are having the HR or designated rep travel to the employees. And of course, it depends on the size, and it does lessen liability if you're sending a trained personnel to verify. It can be a little bit costly, so it kind of depends on which way you'd like to go. You can have the employees travel to, the headquarters, again, a little bit more costly, but depends on the number of re-verifications and does lessen liability. If you have a town hall or a company-wide meeting, it might be helpful to plan it accordingly so you can kind of get it within that deadline. You can hire a consultant, a trained representative in a nearby organization that you're kind of working with, an attorney, or even a notary. Please do keep in mind that some of the notaries aren't willing to fill out the form just because they don't feel that it's certified, but there are some companies that are specializing in this. So definitely call ahead to kind of ask. Another option is I-9 software. And I know Eric briefly spoke about this, which we'll kind of get into a little bit later. But it's the great thing about this platform, or a platform such as I-9 Everywhere, is you get that high level of compliance, and you're also kind of doing the paperwork electronically. Say, for example, somebody uploads their document and it's technically incorrect, at least that system has that barrier. So having an I-9 software system just for compliance is a great option. Lastly would be the guided virtual procedure, which would work very similarly to I-9 Everywhere, except the HR rep would walk through the third party, virtually on how to complete the form, and the third party would sign section 2. So be the signer and verifier of the documents.
Awesome. So I know the travel, that's gonna really depend on the company, right?
Yeah,
I don't think it's a bad idea, if, if we're talking about like a metropolitan area or like the Chicagoland area, if someone, if your business is downtown, but the employee lives in like, I don't know, Lombard. Well, hey, just first day, come on site, right? You can do a lot of things there. You can do some orientation, you can meet face to face, which is important. But obviously that's not going to work if you have employees all around the country. And so that's where I think probably the most practical solution that we see our clients using is this I-9 software system or I-9 everywhere. So are we going to talk more about that next, or do we have additional guidelines? If we want to go to the next slide. Go ahead, Moni, you want to take us through this?
Yeah, I can take it. Yep. So for acceptable documents, so this slide kind of also talks about all the additional information you need to know about the Form I-9. So acceptable documents for Section 2, an employer can show one document from List A or one document from List B and one document from List C. So examples of List A documents are US passport, a US passport card. I know those are uncommon, but that is acceptable for verifying employment as well as verifying identity. So technically from List A, you only need one document because that document verifies your identity as well as employment authorization. Unlike, List B, some of those documents are driver's license, an ID, a voter's registration card, and that just verifies your identification. From examples from List C are like a social security card, that's pretty much the biggest one, or even a birth certificate. When you're looking at a birth certificate, you need the original or a certified copy. Some social security cards also say not valid for employment, so you need to take a look at those details. It's always great to look at front and back just to kind of see. So with this, for an employee who technically can't produce an acceptable document or a receipt within 3 days, technically we can have the employer put them on a leave of absence for a reasonable amount of time and require, for them to obtain that documentation. Our best practice here at Tandem HR is 7 days. An employer may also terminate the employee if they can't provide that documentation. Whichever direction you want to go in, it just needs to be kind of applied seamlessly.
So I want to slow us down and break that out a little bit.
Yeah, of course.
Well, we actually had 2 questions about that. One, that they were submitted by people who registered. What if a new hire can't produce the right documents on Form I-9 was one question. The other question is, what happens if I cannot meet the timeline to submit I-9? And I heard you talk maybe about both of those. So
Correct.
What happens if a new hire can't produce the right documents? They show up, they say, I have a license, and that's it, right? So technically they would need one from List B, which is a license. List C, you mentioned social security card, and they say, I don't have one. What's an employer do in that situation?
Correct. So in that situation, we can put them on a leave for 7 days is what we recommend. Also, you can terminate employment right away, but whatever you do, you need to stay consistent. You can't pick one or the other depending on the title, gender, all that stuff, because then that could lead into a separate case. But you can also give them a certain amount of time to provide those. Say, for example, they lost their social security card and they need to go down to go get a receipt. You can get that receipt, but then once they get that card, you do need to physically examine it, take a look at it, and see if it's actually valid.
So Mona,
Okay.
Marcus, if you don't mind. So Mona, we were just referencing a new hire in that example. Now, if we have a current employee and we've done our own internal audit, and let's just say we've identified that there is some kind of, we feel fraudulent documents that were uncovered, what would be best practice for, talking to those employees that would, that we see that we've uncovered that these documents are in fact might be fraudulent? What would be the best practice, would you say, in counsel with an employer there?
So when we knowingly find out, say if this was missed previously and we're re-auditing ourselves, the best way to handle that is to create pretty much one sort of letter saying that, hey, we need to get more documentation, allow them 10 days to be able to get that documentation. During those 10 days, they can actually work. If they can't provide it to you within those 10 days, then unfortunately, we can separate employment. If they do provide it and say, for example, it's a brand new social security card or a brand new ID or a brand new passport, then technically we can fill out a brand new form, an I-9 form, instead of just re-verifying it. But I would keep both copies no matter what. So even if you're adding the corrections or anything, and we'll kind of get into that later, but I would keep all copies of I-9s.
With regards to the social security card, I think you said something interesting the other day. Didn't you mention that the government has a specific,
Yes.
font or something that they have
They
and
do.
keeps it
So
themselves?
so when you're visually looking at it as an HR representative or even a designated personnel, with specific to the social security card and the number on it, that specific font is government regulated. So it's not offered anywhere in any system. So that's a really good tactic you can use to see if it's valid or not. And it's more of that typewriter font. You can see it more with the 6s and with the 9s. So those are the two numbers that I would carefully look at to see if it's valid, or if it was typed up and it's Arial or bold or something along those lines.
Awesome.
Yeah, and if someone is presented, I guess, if you're authorizing or if you're signing section 2 of the I-9 and you're looking at a document that you don't think is legit, it may be uncomfortable, but you really got to call that out because it's protecting the company. You have we'll get into this in a minute, but there can be consequences to signing something that you don't believe is true and correct. And if you're presented with something that you don't believe is a correct document, I think when we talked with this ICE agent, he said that the best phrase to use is the document you presented does not appear consistent with a genuine document. So you're not saying, hey, this is a fake, doesn't appear consistent. So I'm gonna need something else to verify. I can't sign my name to this because it doesn't appear genuine. So that's if they can't produce the documents. Now, the other question we got was, what happens if I can't meet the timeline? The 3 days, the three days from the date of hire. What happens if I can't meet that? What would you recommend?
Yeah, of course. I think I would do the same thing. Have that conversation with your HR representative and say, hey, unfortunately, I can't meet that. What are my options? And at that point in time, the HR representative kind of looks at the past history of what they've previously done and best practices, and either puts them on a leave of absence or unfortunately be like, hey, have that hard conversation of we have to let you go.
And Marcus, I'll add from the employer's perspective, if we're unable to get to section 2 and complete that,
work happens. You get
work happens,
we're
flights delayed, can't get out of California, if you will, for 10 days. So honesty is the best policy is with the I-9. So you complete it as soon as you can. The worst thing you can do is put a fraudulent date on that form. That form is a living, breathing document, essentially. It's an affidavit. So mark that, and it's in good faith. You did it and you could put additional comments. There's a box on the form I-9 where you could, put your reason for, having to submit that thing on day 5. So, hopefully the government, if they should come knocking on the door, would be reasonable, if you will. So again, honesty is the best policy if you can't get that thing done timely. But again, having the best kind of orientation practices and procedures and checklists can help with that, keeping organized.
So let's so I've got one question that I think is pertinent here, but then let's move on. I think we're going to take a look at the actual forms themselves. But the question we got is about saving copies of the documentation. Is the employee still required to upload their documentation, and is that acceptable for verification by the rep? So I think this question may relate to what we were talking about a minute ago, which is the remote using a remote service. So actually, why don't we table that? Let's go through this and then we'll pick this question up on the other end.
Yeah, sounds good. So this is section 1 of the form I-9. So I wanted to kind of go over some common mistakes or just some little tidbits to kind of get you guys prepared. So I'm not going to go over, the first name, last name, all of that is very self-explanatory. If you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of us. But one of the violations that a lot of people don't know is using the NA. So say, for example, somebody doesn't have another last name or doesn't even have a middle initial. I don't have a middle initial. So each time I have to put NA in that field. For the date format, it needs to be month, date, day, and then 4 digits for the year. Say, for example, you put 1/01/1970. It is wrong. It is considered a violation. For social security number, not all folks have social security numbers. I know if you're using E-Verify, then yes, it is mandatory, but it's not guaranteed or it's not required to put a social security. If you have it, great, recommend it. It's good to go. But it's not required. An employee signature, the employee signature has to be valid, real, or at least some sort of acknowledgement needs to be there. And I know Marcus will or Eric will kind of talk about that a little bit later, but it can't be just on a PDF. The date has to be the employee's start date or the date prior to it. If it's not, it is a violation. And then we need to ensure that one of those boxes of a citizen, non-citizen, lawful permanent resident is filled out, and then the appropriate number associated with that document is filled there as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah, Marcus, I was going to kind of poke you here as far as if you can help the audience better understand the importance of the employee signature, and then in the electronic world and HIRS systems that are out there, and employees doing onboarding electronically, why is it so important that there's a signature with a timestamp, if you will, and what that looks like? And
so we kind of got into the weeds in this, and so it has to be a signature, which in today's world, you can sign documents electronically. That is okay. So it doesn't have to be, sometimes you hear like a wet signature, like where it has to be like actual ink on paper. It doesn't have to be that. That's okay. It doesn't have to be that. If you're doing these in an I-9 HRIS system, like People Hub or Prism that Tandem uses, it is an electronic signature. So the signature is time stamped. There are pop-ups that caution the employee, they caution the employer when they're filling out section 2. Hey, by acknowledging here, you are signing this under penalty of perjury. Do you want to sign? Click sign. That has the same legal impact as an actual, like a wet signature. Now, distinguish that from someone pulling up a PDF and simply typing their name and saving it, and then calling that the I-9 or calling that section 1 or section 2. That is not okay. That is not okay. So even though you may say, well, we did the I-9 electronically, typing in the signature or typing in your name as your signature is not sufficient. It has to be an electronic signature that's time stamped, that tells the person who's signing, hey, this is, you're going to be held to this, basically.
Yep.
Yeah. So do you want to take a look at section 2?
Perfect. All right. So section 2, very, very similar to, section 1. The NA boxes must be filled out. The date format needs to be correctly put in. On the right-hand side, it says right after the middle name or the middle initial, there's a citizenship and immigration status. So this number is corresponding to the employee status from section 1, and it needs to be filled out. This is more on the newer forms. So if you're going through the audit and you don't see it on previous forms, that's totally okay. You don't need to fill out a new one. But the documents need to be properly inspected and filled out accordingly. And under the certification side, so when you go to this bottom point, the employee's first day, that is the employee's first day. When you go underneath that to today's date, that's within that 3 business day window. So it's okay if that date doesn't match the date above it. As long as it's in that compliance period, we're good to go. This is again is more of like, as Marcus said, the wet signature, it's physically done. Wanted an example with both electronic and handwritten. And again, there's many ways that you can kind of, mess this up, or if there's anything that needs to be corrected, you want to use that additional field. So for example, when you're going back and re-verifying all of your employees for COVID, you put in the additional information box. On 6/29, re-verified Eric Morris's Social Security and, driver's license, or, so on and so, whatever documents that they've kind of presented to you, just so if ICE does come and comes and audits you, they understand that, yes, it was virtually done, and now it's been physically seen and re-verified.
And Mona, we're not doing new I-9s, right? We're gonna
No.
take the original ones and we're gonna edit those ones, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless there's like a significant amount of mistakes, the ICE agent that I've kind of been working with on this audit did recommend that instead of writing over all of the, the entire document, if you see a lot of compliance mistakes, go ahead, fill out a new form and write in good faith, all the mistakes that you've kind of corrected, and then staple it together. Make sure you're keeping it together.
Got it.
All right, we want to head to the next slide.
Yes.
So-
Go ahead.
Oh, so this is kind of how we interact with our clients on I-9 compliance. How we partner with clients, like we can help with training, we can help with specific questions. We obviously utilize our HRIS system, which kind of, I don't want to say it forces compliance, but it does have some checks and balances in it, right? It has like I mentioned earlier, if we use our HRIS system to verify I-9s, it will prompt you to make sure that you're signing under penalty of perjury. It put a stop in our system so that we can't process payroll for someone if Section 2 of the I-9 hasn't been completed. So it kind of forces you to be a little more diligent on it. And so, we obviously want clients to comply with this. We obviously want to help however we can. This isn't something that we can just kind of take off of clients 100%, however, because like we mentioned earlier, you do have to have eyes on the documents in person so you can inspect them and see if they are reasonably genuine, and then sign the verification. So that's kind of how we help ensure I-9 compliance. And we had a question here from a registrant. Have you heard if DHS has passed to accept forms for I-9 electronically? The company utilizes E-Verify for all new hires. So a couple things there. One, just so we're clear, these I-9 forms, we're not submitting these to the government. We have to keep them. We have to keep accurate records, and we have to keep accurate information in those records, but we're not actually filing them anywhere. But as for accepting documents electronically, Eric, I think you looked into that a little bit.
Yeah, I did. And with the pandemic, a lot of feedback has been shared to the federal government, state, and local governments of I-9 alternatives of accepting documents, and trying to see if that we can keep some of these measures and flexibilities that have been put in place and that are coming to an end at the end of July. So there is a proposal out there officially with the federal government, and within the process of how the USICS takes proposals, it's going through that process. I believe it started in August of last year. And it does take an absolute long time for them to review these. They're looking into some of the flexibilities that we've allowed for the remote virtual inspections, initiating a pilot program. So stay tuned. They did say they would have a response by the end of this year. So there has been nothing officially by Department of Homeland Security. That is the department that's looking into this, to be clear. But yeah, they have not issued a ruling yet, but more to come on that. And as soon as we do have information, we share that with our clients through our navigator. And so yeah, we'll definitely stay tuned for that.
Mhm. So what we're talking about today, this, guidance ending on July 31st, that's what's happening now.
Yeah.
In the future, there may be some other developments, and it sounds like the federal government's talking about that, but
Yep.
at this point, it's a proposal and they're considering it, and maybe it'll happen next year.
Yep. So physically seeing documents after July 31st, prior to COVID, it's going back to the way it used to be as far as I-9 management. So nothing new from that front.
So let's go to the next slide, and then this may be the time that we want to pick up that question again that we had. Is the employee still required to upload their documentation, and is that acceptable for verification by the rep? Can we level set here on what we're talking about? Talking about company that is remote. They have remote workers all over the place, and so they are utilizing, let's call it I-9 Everywhere, which is the company that we partner with and recommend to our clients. This is how they would do remote verification, right? So how does that work? How does that ensure compliance? How does a company interact with a vendor like that? So Mona or Eric, either one. You guys
Mona, you want to take that one, or I'm happy to?
Yeah, of course. So with remote workers, when an employee is hired and working remotely, employers may choose a designated representative to review that worker's document, or it's as we were kind of saying before, you can kind of choose. If I'm starting a new job, I'm probably going to choose my husband because he's right next to me and he can verify those documents, complete section 2. However, the HR representative, if that's Eric, he's going to walk my husband through each and individual portion to ensure that the Form I-9 is compliant. When I mean by each individual, I would say make sure that the month is in 2 days, using 2 digits, making sure you're writing NA and the middle initial field, since I don't have one. So it's making sure that you're very meticulous when it comes to this process, because again, you're liable for any mistakes that do pop up.
What if they use I-9 Everywhere? How does that work?
Yeah. So I-9 Everywhere is pretty much, it's a software system. I put in all my documents. I ask my husband to kind of verify, he'll kind of sign off on it. Then it gets sent off to another sort of like level of compliance. They kind of check it. Say if I'm putting my passport in there and I flip to the wrong page and, send that out, they're going to actually catch that, email me as well as the HR representative to say, hey, technically Mona needs to re-upload her documentation. And so it's nice to have that they have a secondary, level of compliance to ensure that we're doing it correctly.
So
Marcus,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I-9 Everywhere does require the documents to be uploaded. So let's be clear there. So that's a vendor that does, it requires it. And then if you're not using an I-9 Everywhere type of vendor and you're kind of just managing it through an electronic HIRS and you have options to upload documents and save those, just a couple best practices there that I'd want to hit on is, if you're going to upload documents and save those documents, one, you're going to want to do that for every employee and be consistent there. And two, it's not legally required to upload and save documents. The mandate is to physically see and inspect the document for its genuinity. And so if you're not using a vendor in itself and you're just kind of managing it yourself through an HIRS or just on a paper I-9, you do not need to keep ID pictures or make copies of these. But if you do, you need to do it for everybody. So I don't know if you want to elaborate any more on that one.
Yeah, and I like how you distinguish like remote vendor. If you're using I-9 everywhere, you absolutely need to upload it. A couple things I wanted to point out there is I-9 everywhere, you kind of have a second set of eyes, like you said, Mona. You're still gonna have somebody, could be your husband, verifying section 2 of the I-9. But because you have to upload the documents, I-9 everywhere will take a look at it and say, hey, that's a fraudulent document. And they'll catch some of those errors. So you have a little bit more security if you're a company that's outsourcing or you have remote employees, because like you said, it's still the company's liability. So that's the outsource I-9 everywhere option. The in-source, if you're still doing it, call it the old fashioned way, the company's verifying their own I-9s. You're right, Eric, you're not legally required to keep copies of those documents. However, if you do keep copies of those documents, do it for everyone. And if you're ever in a situation, and we just learned this from the ICE agent that we spoke with, if you have copies of those documents, it's another step towards showing the government, hey, we're trying the best we can. We're showing good faith here. I verified these documents, and actually here's a copy of what I looked at when I did it. So not legally required, but also not a bad idea to do it. Yeah. So we have a couple more questions, but I'm also doing a time check here. We have 17 minutes left. Mona, I wonder if you wanted to mention anything on here, and then we can get to some questions.
Yeah, of course. I can just quickly kind of talk through this. So some common issues for correcting errors. I know that we kind of went through this on the previous couple of slides, but you should be regularly auditing. I can't harp on how important regular and periodic audits are. It just avoids those big and small, violations. Also allows you to review accuracy and proper record retention. Make sure you're properly filing your I-9s and have a proper storage for those, with specific documents being so important. So I know we kind of already talked about false identifications. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you're choosing paper form, they do need to be kept separate from the employee file. Say if ICE comes and it's more of a raid rather than, they're giving you 3 business days to get everything together. You don't want to hand over the entire employee file. You want to have a specific, either whether it's a binder or, an electronic space or a storage where you can just give those forms. And there are strict standards outlined in the M20, or sorry, I think it's like 274, I believe. It's pretty much like the I-9 handbook, quote unquote. So if you want to take a look at that, it's great. It's a lot of material. It's very heavy, but very good. Retained documents, we already kind of went through this. Again, we highly recommend keeping a copy. We've already kind of talked through remote workers, mergers. I think one of the questions was about this. Do you want me to go over it now? Happy to do so.
Yeah.
Okay. So say that, employer, they're acquiring employees or, from another entity, and may choose to complete brand new I-9s, or they can keep the previous employer's completed I-9 form. Now, the caveat to that is if you're keeping the previous I-9s, then you are responsible, the new employer is responsible for all the mistakes, all the violations in that. So it's completely up to you. Again, I would review it, see what you guys think is best. But when it comes specific to that, you do have options.
Marcus, with your experience, I'm sorry, Mona, Marcus, any best practices for mergers and acquisitions with, bringing on, keeping I-9s or having employees do new I-9s? Any pros or cons there?
I mean, it's really going to depend on the company that you're acquiring or merging with. I mean, if you get a feel for, how compliant they are in diligence, you kind of make a judgment call. I totally get it when, we deal with clients who are like, look, I don't want to make the employees do that. We want this to be as seamless as possible for the employees. I totally get their perspective, but I also, there's risk associated with that. Is it a lot of risk? Probably not, but it's more than zero, right? So if you're comfortable with that, I guess the point is, like, if you're gonna say, hey, we value the employee experience in a merger situation, so we don't want them to come in and like have to show their ID and make it feel like they're, reapplying for their jobs. I do understand that. But you won't be able to later claim like, well, we didn't mess this up. You kind of, you take it all, right?
Mhm. Or you can kind of plan it and make sure you're conducting your, your annual, whatever, time audit during
Mhm.
that time period. So that's always another option.
Yeah. I do want to transition to questions if we could, because we have gotten quite a few. And I think people are still struggling to distinguish a little bit between like I-9 everywhere, this designated rep I-9 verification, and then the actual I-9 verification through our HRIS system. So first question, how is I-9 everywhere different from uploading the proof docs with our HRIS system with the physically viewing them? So here's how it's different. If and please jump in, guys. If you're physically viewing the document, employee comes into your office, I'm viewing the document, I'm going to take a copy of them, I'm going to upload them, I'm going to sign. That's how, through the HRIS system. That means you are, personally looking at the document. If you're using I-9 everywhere, that means that a company rep, designated rep, is viewing the document. So if you're using I-9 everywhere, we keep going back to this example, but Mona, your husband, verifies he's looking at your doc. So that is satisfying the physically viewing component of I-9. Then you're uploading the documents to, again, we'll use the example I-9 everywhere, which is also going to double check a little bit of the documents. So in that circumstance, the HR rep or the company, the employer, is not physically viewing the I-9 documents.
Correct.
Your husband would be, and I-9 everywhere would be. It's the company's risk, but this is a way to make it compliant. It's a way to make it, I guess, less risky than just having an HR rep or the company get on a Zoom with your husband and saying, okay, can you take a look at Mona's documents and make sure they're compliant? And here's how you need to fill it out, right? I-9 gives you another, or I-9 everywhere gives you another measure of security.
Yeah.
Let's see. So the new employee can have their friend verify documents and complete section 2 of the I-9 form. The HR representative would not need to complete any portion of the document in this case. Correct. But again, it's a risk. It's a risk that the company's taking, right? That is a true statement. But I think our recommendation would be using a vendor such as I-9 everywhere would help provide some assurances there that you're not just going to be getting completely bogus verifications. How does I-9 everywhere or I-9 anywhere? Maybe that's a competitor. I-9 anywhere. I-9 everywhere differ from the virtual inspection of documents by the employer. It's different because there is still in-person inspection, right? That in-person inspection is done by Mona's husband, though.
Yes. So Eric would pretty much be guiding my husband, if that's like the virtual guided procedure on, okay, great, this is what you need to look at on the social security card. How does numbers look? Or, asking those questions. And I don't think ICE expects us to be at their level, but the documents that the government has provided, it is pretty easy to know that, okay, if this is fake or if it's not,
Yeah, and I-9 everywhere, I just want to be clear. Again, it is a very easy tool to use, and it has step-by-step processes for the employee and the Section 2 authorized representative. And again, to be clear, the authorized representative can be anybody, neighbor, husband, spouse, aunt, uncle, and they are physically seeing that employee's document and attesting under penalty of perjury that they physically have seen that document. And that is what is the biggest difference between uploading a document into an HIRS. Because as on the other side of that, computer, you're just seeing it through a scan or an electronic file. You're not actually physically seeing the genuinity of that document.
Yeah, you
Whereas-
can touch it, you can feel it,
Yeah,
you can expect it.
exactly. And that is the
Yep.
clear differentiator between that platform and then uploading it into your HIRS.
And so that ties in. We had another question. Why is I-9 anywhere, it's everywhere, acceptable, but virtual inspection by the employer is not? Again, because there still is in-person inspection by I-9 everywhere.
Physically being seen.
It's physically inspected by someone who has to sign their name or face consequences. And you have the secondary check of the virtual document by I-9 everywhere. We also had a question. You mentioned Tandem as a partnership with I-9 everywhere. What are the costs? If I'm going to be honest, that's a question I should know the answer to, but I don't. If this person could send me an email, my email is on the screen there. I'm happy to chat with you and get you a quote for that service. We had a question. If retaining copies of I-9 docs is recommended, is Tandem able to turn back on the feature, allowing employees to upload a copy and make it required so that it's fair and consistent for all employees? I don't know the answer to that. Do you guys have anything on that?
I think it's something we could definitely explore. I know Prism does have capabilities of kind of toggling between. Again, it's not something legally required to house IDs and keep and retain IDs. So it's definitely something we can explore, and whoever posted that, I think can reach out to us,
Yeah.
Marcus, reach out to you directly, and we could definitely look into that for them.
The thing I'm thinking about there, go ahead, Mona, sorry.
Sorry, just to add, I think when it comes to, or the reason why we kind of turned it on and off, and please, both of you correct me if I'm wrong, is because it kind of depends on the client itself and what their best practices are. So what my recommendation would be, during that time, if that's something you would like to do, is to then retake a look at all of your your procedures, your standard procedures, as we were kind of discussing earlier, to be like, hey, I think this is how we were going to do it, date, and make sure that it's, you have a date and effective of what you want to do going forward. So it's not like you have two best practices.
Yeah, that's an important point. Like, if you're going to change practice, like as of this date going forward, this is how we're going to do it.
Yes, and make sure it's documented.
The other thing I'm thinking about on that question, it's a very technical question about how Prism or the HRIS system operates. I don't know the downstream consequences of having that on as a requirement or not. And so I would hate to just shoot from the hip on that. So please, if you're the person that's in that question, please email me and I'll get you an answer. Those are all the questions we have so far, but we have 6 minutes left. So any other questions that anyone has, please put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. Mona, Eric, I don't know if you have anything that you want to address with our remaining 5 minutes now.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out there for the audience, something that if you are an employer that's intending or an attendee and that has employees in Florida, as of July 1st, employers with private employers with employees of 25 or more will now be required to utilize E-Verify. So there were 22 states from any public or private fashion of being mandated to utilize E-Verify. So if you are attending and you have, again, employees working in Florida, and you have 25 or more employees, just be sure to register or talk to your vendors or management companies, if you will, and make sure you got E-Verify up and running by July 1st for onboarding.
Quick question. E-Verify is different than I-9, correct?
Different than I'm sorry, say that question again. Than I-9 everywhere?
No. E-Verify is different from Form I-9.
Yeah, correct. Correct.
Okay. And
They use the I-9, E-Verify uses information from the Form I-9 to verify employment using the government database to verify the eligibility for employment in the United States.
That document is correct. That document is valid. That's a great way, or another way that a lot of people, and I recommend a lot to my clients, to add E-Verify, because that's just another level of protection. Again, if ICE comes in, you can say that, oh, I ran this through E-Verify and it was okay. And we found out later that technically it was a, false identification, or, something along those lines.
The good point, good distinction. We do have a couple questions coming in, Eric, about E-Verify in Florida. Is that required for private employers with 25 or more Florida employees, or 25 or more employees company-wide?
I believe it'd be 25 employees operating in Florida, but yeah, it'd be 25 employees in Florida. It's got to be specific to Florida.
Okay.
Would you agree?
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I would, yeah, no, from all of my research, it's
Okay.
25
I
worksite
think
employees in
that's
Florida.
what I read too, Eric.
Yeah.
Do you know if other states will be requiring employers to utilize E-Verify? You said there were 22 states that require it.
Yeah, E-Verify on its basis is voluntary, so let's be clear, but there's 22 states, now 23 as of July 1st, that mandates either a public or private employer within some kind of legality rules or federal contracts utilize E-Verify. It does seem to be the trend, but time will tell. Florida just passed it, so we'll continue to monitor and update our clients as we hear the news.
I know from past experience, sometimes lender agreements will require companies to use E-Verify as well. Okay, we'll make this our last question. Can you revisit the practice of verifying I-9's post-pandemic guidelines? How is the I-9 form updated to capture in-person verification?
Yeah, I can take that one. So say, for example, you have people coming in, or depending on which procedure you're using, let's just say we have a company-wide meeting and the employees are coming in, and at that point in time, we're going to use it to re-verify it. So I'm the HR rep. Let's use Eric. So Eric comes into my office with his, 2 identifications, with his driver's license and a social security card. I'm going to physically see it, look at it, examine it. Then, if you go to, do you mind going back to the section 2? Yeah.
In the slide, yeah. Going back, yeah, 2 or 3 slides, maybe.
If not, no worry about it. So in section 2, there is an additional information portion, or a part, or a box. You pretty much in there, you can write examined driver's license and social security card on this date, and is valid. And you can actually reach out to us if you want to get more proper lingo. We can get that set for you. And depending on how many you are re-verifying, and just to kind of make it easier and simpler for you.
Yeah, I think so. I think this question is about just like first time new hire verify. They're asking us to revisit that practice. The way I interpret it, verifying I-9 post-pandemic guidelines, how is the I-9 form updated? The I-9 form isn't updated, correct? The I-9 form is the same as it was, where you had to look at the documents in person and then, sign, yes, I saw these documents, they're true and correct, and they match the person that we hired. That's what you had to do before the pandemic. During the pandemic, they said, you don't have to do that because we all had to socially distance and, work from home and all that good stuff. So you could show it on a video screen. Now, effective July 31st, you have to go back to physically seeing the documents in person. And so form hasn't changed. Form is the same. We're just kind of reverting back to before the pandemic. You got to look at it in person, and then, and then verify it.
Correct. And also with the forms that were seen, or I guess were looked at virtually, those need to be re-verified as well.
Okay. Yeah. Good clarification. Well, we are technically a minute over. I apologize for that. We had a lot of great questions. This is obviously a topic that's on people's minds. Again, the recording will go out to all participants or all registrants. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Mona. Thank you, Eric, for kind of having this discussion with everyone. If you have any questions that we didn't answer, or if something comes up afterwards, please feel free to reach out to us. And we will do this again next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank you, everybody.